welcome everybody to today's panel, which is entitled Effectively Using Self-Evaluations for Career Success. This program is a part of SciFar's The Belonging Project. And so just as a little introduction to the Belonging Project, we wanted to give you a little background on where it comes from. So the word Ubuntu became popular worldwide during apartheid as Bishop Desmond Tutu explained a philosophy in multiple South African ethnic groups that our humanity derives from the humanity of the collective. Ubuntu symbolizes the universal bond we have as a people and the focus on collective responsibility. Just as the pandemic has illustrated how interdependent we are, this collective is focused on working together to move forward in our shared commitment to improving inclusion and diversity in the legal profession. We believe that we rise and fall together. Built on this concept, the Belonging Project is a collaborative network of professional and personal support for diverse legal talent across industry, organizations, and law firms. Through the Belonging Project, we are offering opportunities and programs to support diverse law students and lawyers during the pandemic. This initiative contributes to diversity in the legal profession and encourages others to contribute and leverage their expertise and resources. In collaboration with our industry partners, we offer webinars such as this one focused on professional and personal development, one-on-one coaching, and a curated resource center devoted to well-being and professional growth. For more information about the Belonging Project and for access to the resources that are available, please contact Corey Carew and Sin Vargas. Also, this program is eligible for CLE credit, and we will provide the CLE code at the end of the presentation or closer to the end of the presentation. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our panelists for today, Tracy Billows, Tamarin Houston, and Ariel Sokovich. And we will get started on talking about ways that we can effectively use self-evaluations for career success. So my first question is for Ariel and Tracy. What would you say is really kind of the purpose for self-evaluations, and what should associates focus on when they're preparing their self-evaluation?
Tracy, you want to kick it off?
Sure. So, the self-evaluations are really meant to be sort of your way to highlight and showcase all of the great things that you've accomplished and done. Whether it be over the course of the last year, if that's the period for the self-evaluation, or 6 months in the case of mid-year type check-ins. And really the self-evaluations are meant for, not only you to be able to sort of identify all these different things, but to remind people of all the great things you've accomplished and done. And, certainly being an advocate for yourself of saying, look at all these wonderful things that I was able to do. Look at all these competencies I've demonstrated. Look at all of the contributions I have made to my firm, my company, you name it. And, it's a phenomenal opportunity that, admittedly is something that I think gets missed, not because people don't want to do it or can't do it, but it's an uncomfortable experience sometimes talking and bragging about yourself.
Yeah, so I would add to that, and Tracy, you mentioned the competencies. You want to have those in mind when you're writing your self-evaluation, because you have a couple of different sets of stakeholders. You have the folks that you've worked with who know what you've done, they know your good work, they know your areas of development, and so you want to be true to that part of your audience, and so you want your self-evaluation or self-assessment to match up with competencies that you're being evaluated on. And then you have another set of stakeholders, folks in the room on the LDC committee who haven't worked with you. Maybe they're in other departments, but they're going to be part of the process of calibrating your evaluation. And so they're reading your self-evaluation. They don't know you like the folks that work with you. And so to Tracy's point, you want to make sure that you capture all of the good things that you're doing, and that they line up with the competencies that you're expected to be demonstrating, as well as those that you hope that you're demonstrating that bleed into another box. So you want to keep in mind that you've got a couple different sets of audiences or stakeholders.
Gotcha. And that's very helpful advice as we go through the process of self-evaluation and just making sure that we're staying on task with what it's supposed to achieve and who we're supposed to be communicating that to. So as a follow-up question to that for Tamarin and Ariel, how is an associate able to productively acknowledge strengths and weaknesses? In particular, I know that sometimes it can cause anxiety for associates if they are trying to discuss some weaknesses or some areas of improvement or growth that they need to focus on. How do they do that in a productive manner?
That's a really great question, and I remember being an associate and having the same struggles because you want to be self-aware, but you also don't want to come off like you know everything. And so you really have to walk the fine line of having that self-awareness to state the facts. And you can say, over the course of the year, I worked on 15 transactions for 4 different partners, and then you can weave in feedback that you've gotten. So if you've gotten really great feedback from someone, I always say keep a kudos email, file box in your email, and you can kind of weave in those great responses that you've gotten. So I've worked on 15 different transactions with 7 different partners, and partner X actually had this to say about my work. So if you're uncomfortable bragging about yourself, you can use the words of others to reflect your good work. Also, for folks who don't like to brag, I don't fall into that category, but if you do, you want to make sure you just really state the facts and stay clear to what you've done all year. And I think that helps because the reviewers that are looking at your evaluation, they can gather how successful you are just based on the volume of work or the difficulty of the work that you've been doing. Because the partners, we all know each other, and we know who the hard graders are. So if you work for certain partners in your group, we can gauge, oh, you work for Tracy, who is great, but we'll just use her as an example. If I know she's a hard grader and you do all of your work for Tracy and she comes back to you transaction or deal after deal, I know you have to be doing something right. So you can highlight things. If you're scared to brag, you can highlight things indirectly by just being factual.
And so I think that's great advice, Tamarin, and there's lots of literature about how to write an effective self-evaluation. And one of the things you see over and over again is this notion of having your self-evaluation be evidence-based. So the concepts that Tamarin is talking about of linking how you describe your year with kudos or accolades or results, that will really serve you well. I think it's important for folks to be true to yourself, who you are. Writing about yourself is hard. And it's something that even today as partners, we all struggle with. We all go through the same processes as associates do in sort of an evaluative process. So be true to yourself, and then acknowledge challenges, acknowledge areas of development. Our form doesn't do a great job of really eliciting that. But again, remember when you are thinking about your audience, there are folks who are looking at your review who you've worked with, they know your year. And so you want to acknowledge the good things. You want to acknowledge your teams and the people who worked with you on success, but you also want to own those areas that maybe you had some challenge or had some difficulty. Talk about what you've gained or learned from that and how you're going to sort of not repeat the same mistake again, or what you've learned from that experience. I think we look for that. We like to see that. And I think that goes again to sort of being true to yourself.
And one last thing I'd add, compare yourself to yourself. Don't compare yourself to an associate down the hall or maybe a more senior associate with whom you work with because they get it and you're still learning from them. Recognize the process. I know Tracy mentioned know the competencies, know where you fall in your company's or your firm's grid, and really hone in on that versus comparing yourself to an associate down the hall who does different work or who does the same work but may do a different segment of that work. Really compare yourself against yourself and talk about your strengths and your weaknesses with that in mind and not focusing on others.
Mm-hmm.
That's very helpful. I think it's always good to get a good reminder of how you assess yourself and assess yourself fairly by comparing yourself not only to the competencies, but making sure that you're focusing on yourself as and the role that you occupy for your firm. So with that in mind, Tracy and Ariel, as evaluators, what you are focusing on, or what is it you're looking for when you're reviewing self-evaluations? What kind of self-assessment or self-awareness are you looking for? As well as what are some best practices that you've seen employed, as well as maybe some negative practices that you've seen employed? And finally, what are some items that you wish you had known earlier in your career as you were preparing self-evaluations, being that you're now on the other side of reviewing self-evaluations?
Tracy, you want to take a first stab at that?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So a number of things come to mind here. I mean, number one, when I'm reviewing self-evaluations, I'm looking to get a sense of the year that someone has had. And I'm reviewing them from a department perspective. I'm in labor and employment. And now in my new role, I'm reviewing them from an office perspective. So I'm also reviewing them for people that I may not necessarily substantively work with on a regular basis. And so I use the self-evaluations when I'm reviewing them to make sure that I have a good understanding of, number one, this individual's role, how they feel they're doing against the competencies, where they feel their strengths are, where they feel they might have a few areas of improvement. And, what are they hoping for? What do they want? What would make them happy? How are they defining success, and what is that looking like? Because at the end of the day, while I use the self-evaluations, of course, through the process, of assessing performance, which, of course, impacts, moving up in the competencies, and at Cyfarth, moving up in the 9-box grid system, and, at other firms, different programs that they have. But I'm also viewing it from the lens of how do I help this person get on the right path and make sure they're provided those opportunities to provide them those successes, to provide them those things they want. And while admittedly, I would love to be able to say I can have a conversation with everyone every year on that topic, it's just sometimes impossible for that to happen for me. So I love it when I see that in there, because then I can pick up the phone and say, hey, I happen to see this in your self-evaluation. I know there's X program coming up. Why don't we talk about seeing if we can get you on the panel? Or maybe this is something you want to attend, or I didn't know you were interested in X area. We need to introduce you to this client, because we're always getting work from them. And so it's a great way, not just for me to, help assess someone's performance and understand, all the key things I need, but I also use it for that additional purpose. I'll share some bad habits with you that I learned to, well, I guess I generally learned to not do. I try not to do this anymore now that I'm a partner. But number one, you really have to think about your self-evaluation ahead of time. I swear there were a couple of years where I copied and pasted from the year before, and I tried to change things up and modify what I had done because I had left it too long to the end. And it shows, right? I did myself a disservice because I really didn't focus on that time period and what had been going on and what was really critical to communicate. I just sort of defaulted to falling back to, okay, well, people know generally what I do. I'll, update a couple matters, I'll update a couple things, and, everybody knows who I am. And so that's fine. And that's not how it works. People want you to identify, those key achievements, things that you've accomplished, et cetera. And, part of my perspective was skewed. I came out of corporate America. So before, I started practicing law, I worked in HR, and we had performance reviews and things of that sort, but it was different. It was very hierarchical. There was a very key structure of who reviewed the evaluations and the self-evaluations and for what purpose. And there was a path for not partnership, excuse me, path for promotion and things like that. That was, much more defined. And so I kind of took for granted when I first started practicing law that some of the same things would happen, that people would just recognize what I was doing, and that my good work would speak for itself. So, certainly, I guess if I were going to suggest, some things to learn from my mistakes is plan accordingly. I love Cameron's idea. I've never had such a folder. I'm going to create one now. I'm the one who's searching for those emails when it comes time to do it, as opposed to finding them in a folder so easily. But, plan ahead. Think about what messaging you want to do. Think about, as we've said, who your key stakeholders are. Well, who are you writing this for? And ultimately do yourself the best service you can to yourself by being able to present the best recitation of all of the things you've accomplished, all of the things you've done. And as I said, your sort of hopes and dreams, if you will, so that people know what it is that you want to be accomplishing going forward.
Well, that's a terrific answer. I'm not sure that I have that much to add to it. I thought maybe I would sort of go backwards and maybe start with what do I wish I had known about the process when I was going through it. And a little bit like Tracy, I never really thought that the self-evaluation was that important a part of the process. I always thought it's what my evaluators are writing and saying about me that is important. And so, it took me a while to figure out that what I had to say about myself actually had a sort of an important role in this process.
Yeah.
And so, I just didn't put as much effort into it as looking back. Now that I'm on the other side of that process, when I look at them, I'm very much looking for how does the self-evaluation line up with what everybody else is saying. And so to the extent that there is consistency and overlap and thematic, shared thematic points, then I look in and I say, this person, is self-aware. I think they're able to accurately assess their year. And for me, that's a positive, regardless of whether the highs are really high or they've had some challenges. I'm much more interested in how they line up with their evaluators. That tells me a lot about someone's self-awareness. I do think it's important to honor, teams, and because we do so much as teams. So I do look if there's too much I. I may ask, where's the we? It can't possibly be all you. Candidly, I don't see that very often. And then sort of, the last part of it is I actually look for things that I didn't know about. So I want to hear about community involvement. I want to hear about business development. I want to hear about some things that don't pop up as sort of the first areas of self-assessment, because that's my way, to Tracy's point, that's my way of learning a little bit about who you are, what your hopes and aspirations are, and sort of how the Seyfarth community and the Seyfarth culture sort of dovetails with what you want to accomplish. Those are some of the things that I look for.
Excellent. Really helpful.
And
yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to jump in. Just something that both Ariel and Tracy said made me think back to my days as an associate, and I encourage people to include a short wish list, because as everyone has mentioned, you don't know who is going to pick up your review and review it. And there are times when I have reviewed someone in litigation. I'm in real estate myself, but I've reviewed someone's assessment of themselves in litigation, and they say, wow, I wish I could go on a pitch related to this, or I wish I could get more involved in cross-selling. And for those who know me, I love to pitch. I will pitch to a stuffed animal in my office given the opportunity. And so when I read people who want to go on pitches or who want to pitch to clients and don't know how to do it, I really, link up with those folks and say, hey, I am pitching for this work. I don't know anything about your sub area, but if you want the opportunity to pitch in front of someone, by all means, come with me. I love people who are eager to do that. So you never know who's going to be like your fairy godmother or godfather. And as my mother told me, closed mouths don't get fed. So ask for what you want in your evaluation. You can say, you know, in the next year, I hope to get experience in X. I hope to do, you know, Y. I would love to work with X person. Go ahead and take that opportunity to put forward some short wish list of things you hope to accomplish in the next year, because you never know who will read that. And or if you find yourself, you know, needing to be connected to someone, you may find that the person reading your evaluation can connect you with the type of work or the person that you're looking to work with.
Excellent. I think that kind of harkens back to the advice that we were talking about earlier about making sure that you're keeping your audience in mind and making sure that you're preparing it broadly and speaking broadly to any population or any individual who could potentially be reading it. With that in mind, I think one of the interesting things that we are going through as a firm and that we are trying to tackle with the Belonging Project is making sure that there is a sense of belonging and how to acknowledge cultural differences, and how that can make us stronger rather than being something that is viewed as negative or an impediment. So with that in mind, I think one of the topics that is coming up a lot nowadays, in the space of self-evaluation is how can diverse attorneys, or diverse employees generally communicate their achievements in an impactful way while also navigating any possibilities of bias that might occur, or with the knowledge that there might be some cultural differences that might be necessary to overcome, and how are employers kind of looking at the self-evaluation process with the concept of overcoming bias, and acknowledging cultural difference and keeping those things in mind in a meaningful way. And I would love to hear both Tracy and Tamarin on your experience with those questions.
Tamarin, I'll let you go first, if that's all right.
No, those are really good questions. I think I'll take the first question about, you know, when you're writing your self-evaluation, how you can kind of prepare for that. I go back to, you know, state the facts. I will say from my own experience, sometimes I call myself the lonely only. I may be the only Black female in my office. I may be the only Black female in my practice area. I may be the only Black female in whatever is, you know, fill in the blank for yourself. You know, swap out Black female for whatever is your, you know, other category. I have to kind of level set myself and really compare myself to myself and say, where am I in my journey? Where am I in my year? I know myself better than anyone else, making sure that I am reflective in what my year, what the success looked like for me. Did I accomplish those things? And if not, was it because of me, something was holding me back, or because I just wasn't getting the opportunities? I didn't have the secret password to get into, you know, the clubhouse. If that's the thing, I need to put down my wish list so my fairy godmother or godfather, whoever's reading my review, can connect me to the right people. What I found, there were years where I was holding myself back because I felt as the lonely only. I needed to present myself in a way that the next, you know, Black female would feel empowered to do things that I didn't feel empowered to do. And sometimes that can be a very heavy burden to shoulder. And so once I realized I couldn't account for, you know, anyone who came after me, I could just try to be a good example as a great real estate associate, I was able to be more honest about my accomplishments. And so that was something that I had to learn. It wasn't something that came naturally, especially being, you know, one of a few, and this isn't, you know, something that just happens at large law firms. It happens everywhere. You may find yourself where you're the only woman, or you're the only person that came from a small town, and now you're, you know, a small fish in a big pond, and how to navigate those waters. Whatever it is that makes you feel like you're an outsider, recognize that and say, okay, this is me putting pressure on myself that I shouldn't, because others' expectations and perceptions of me may not reflect they may not view me through the same lens. So if you're doing that to yourself, kind of cast those burdens to the side and say, I want people to really look at the work that I did and the things that I accomplished. And if you take that burden off yourself and really stick to the facts, I think you will be better equipped to write a better evaluation for yourself. But if you try to anticipate what others are going to say about you, or anticipate that if I say something about being a working mom, then every other working mom after me is going to be dinged for what I say. You can't do that. You can't account for every situation and everyone's experience. So don't do that. Take that out of the equation and really focus on your journey for that year. And did you meet what success looks like for yourself? And if so, write about that.
All great points that I completely agree with. I'll share a couple of my experiences, and then I'll turn to the sort of the second question, which is more, how can evaluators and others help in the process as well too. From my perspective, one of the key things, and you've heard it from all of us, is you've got to be authentic, right, in your self-evaluation. And for some people, that's, being able to talk about things that others may not talk about in their self-evaluation, but you have to be authentic and true to yourself. And that means, exactly as Tamara just said, including all those key facts, whatever they may be. I can remember, a time where I had an associate who I wasn't in any leadership role or anything like that, but I did evaluate the associate. And I did give the associate, who I had genuinely liked working with, a fairly negative review because she had not met some deadlines. She had turned in a number of position statements that had lots of grammatical and spelling errors. She wasn't responsive to clients, things like that. And I did read her self-evaluation up front. And I, never saw anything in there that suggested that there was a reason for this behavior. And admittedly, I also didn't probably do the best of job of asking, so why has there been this sort of change in performance and things like that? I will acknowledge that. But it was interesting. She came to see me after the review and said, I wish you would have asked me what was going on in my life, because she was going through a very difficult time dealing with trying to have a baby and some medical issues associated with that. Now, I had no clue. This is not something she had confided in me. And at the same point, she hadn't included anything in her self-evaluation, nor am I suggesting that she should. But here was this disconnect between the two of us, right? She wanted me to be more understanding and have a dialogue with her related to her performance. And at the same point, here I was not fully appreciating and recognizing all the things that were going on. So I use it as an example of how, certainly you want to be making sure that you're being true and authentic to yourself. But what I took away from that is saying to people, maybe you do want someone else to read your self-evaluation before you turn it in to get that perspective, right? Maybe someone would have read hers and said, maybe you if you don't want to talk about what you're going through, at least highlight, right, that you recognize that there were some challenges and that, this is what you've done to make sure that those don't happen again. Or maybe, go to your key people that are going to be reviewing you, right, and talk about your self-evaluation before you get to that stage in the process, right? Give them a preview of where this is coming from. And admittedly, I never would have thought of any of those until I had this experience, many, many years ago with this associate. And I really appreciated her trust and comfortability, sharing with me her criticisms of how I approached the situation and what I could have done differently. But I also appreciated that she accepted and understood where I was coming from too, and why I may not have probed and asked certain questions at the time, because I may not have felt comfortable doing so, or that it was appropriate to do so. So, certainly I just want to share that as, something that was a huge learning experience for me in terms of self-evaluations and how, you have to be mindful of that. The other thing that I would say is, certainly, if you do feel that you need some help in that regard, make sure that you are reaching out to your mentors, your sponsors, your key people at the firm. I try and be a bias interrupter throughout our process here at Cypherth every step of the way. I review every evaluation, and I'm not afraid to circle something and call somebody. I'm not afraid to call our professional development team and say, what is this? What is that? And I'm not talking necessarily even in self-evaluations. I'm talking about even in evaluations themselves if needed, to say, why are they coming at this from that perspective? I don't see anything supporting this, right? We need to have a discussion about this. But you're right, not everyone, approaches the process that way, and not everybody has the comfortability of, having those conversations or challenging things. So what I recommend is find people that will make you feel comfortable doing that. I found people here at Cypherth that I knew had my back and that I knew would support me in my efforts. And I've continued to pay that forward now that I'm in leadership and in a position to be able to make sure that others are afforded those same opportunities.
And I think that's very interesting. I think specifically here at Cypherth, we've gotten to the place of having a more collaborative review process through the calibration meetings that we have. So for all three of you, and if you can speak to this, how is the process of having a group evaluation, or kind of having more than one person having access to evaluations and being able to review those, how do you think that has contributed to the ability to kind of navigate cultural differences, kind of like what Tracy said, being able to review evaluations and ask questions that may not have been directed just at Tracy?
So I'll jump in on that. My experience, and I really appreciate what Tamron and Tracy talked about, and I echo what you heard from them. In this concept of having more than one person look or a group look, calibration, I've found that the process to be, first of all, very rigorous, and people come into it, the LDC members, the OMPs, folks who should be acting as bias interrupters. They do come into it with, I think, a very sincere desire to make sure that reviews are fair, that the reviewers have full knowledge. I can't tell you how many times I've sat in one of these meetings where something that either isn't in a self-evaluation or something that hasn't come out in an evaluation gets discussed in the calibration context. And it can be significant and meaningful, and it helps folks to shape or reshape their views. So I think it's a very important process. And I found it to be a very positive process. And like Tracy said, there's certainly been times where, I and others in the LDC sort of leadership have had to say, well, I think there's a different way to say this. Or, don't focus on the fact that somebody had their hours were low because they were on a leave. That's, those are not the areas to focus on, and have people directed toward, we talked about this in the beginning, evidence-based reviews. Let's look at the facts. Let's look at the accolades or the comments, because those are the things that we ought to be focusing on.
Right. From the perspective of just sort of defining calibration for just a quick moment, in case there's others on today that aren't familiar with sort of the Cypherth process, when we say calibration, we get all of our groups together by department and by office, and we have our lawyer development committee members in a room together, basically reviewing the self-evaluations and evaluations of the associates assigned to that department/office. And we are reaching a consensus, if you will, as to how an individual has performed over the course of a year, and sort of what should be their rating, in the sense of, what box in the 9-box grid should they be in? What messaging should we be giving the associate? What goals should we be setting for them, right? All of those sorts of things. So it's a collaborative process whereby we reach consensus. No one person sort of gets to dictate the outcome. And ultimately, it allows for lots of data inputs and, ability to share information that as aptly noted, unfortunately sometimes does just come out in these meetings. For whatever reason, they don't show up in the self-evaluation or the evaluations themselves. And so the process has become very critical for us at SciFarth to make sure that we are taking a holistic approach.
Cool.
And I have to say, I love those meetings because it really is a mix of people. So people from different practice areas. It's not like it's heavily slanted towards one group or another. They really do a great job of making sure the LDC committee members that are in there represent the entire firm and come from different backgrounds and different positions and places in their career and in the partnership, which I think is great because it allows us to really push back on things, especially as a person in real estate. If we're talking about an associate in L&E, the L&E partners may get exactly what the evaluation says and the type of work that they're doing, but as the real estate person in the room, I ask, well, why is that important? Like, you all are talking about this one piece of work that doesn't really seem to have a big impact on the case. So is it that they did a bad job, or they just weren't as, they weren't as responsive as you're used to because you're used to working with Associate X and Associate X is busy? Or we push back and say, this review is really negative. Was that person just having a bad day, meaning the evaluator? Like, were they doing these evaluations during Mad Day? And Mad Day is what I like to call when people haven't eaten, when, they're just having a really terrible day and they take it out on whatever they're focusing on in that period. And sometimes you get people on Mad Day. And what I love about the calibration meetings, we call each other out. We say, hey, we read your other reviews, and your other reviews say really great things about everyone else, but you got to this one review, and you're upset that person didn't respond in 5 minutes. Like, that is not reasonable unless, they knew they needed to be on call and you had a deadline. But otherwise, responding in 10 minutes versus 5 doesn't seem like the end of the world. And that's what I love about my colleagues, that they are okay being called out, and when they need to rectify something, they say, you know what, you're right, let's take this review off the table and look at the other reviews, because it's obvious that this is an outlier and not really representative of that associate or that associate's full year.
That is a relief, certainly. No one wants their evaluation written on Mad Day, so
yeah. So note to any managers on the phone, if you know you're on a Mad Day, don't do the evaluation that day. Take the day off. Ask for an extension.
Yes.
Excellent. And so I think one of the things that we've kind of covered, using the evaluation as a tool to kind of get feedback while you're also trying to push yourself forward, while you're trying to advocate for yourself. So I think associates would really benefit from knowing what are some ways that they can get meaningful follow-up outside of just strictly getting the evaluation. So once they've received their evaluations, or once they've gone through the self-evaluation process and they've had the opportunity to digest the information that's been presented to them, how do they then go back and have a conversation about, okay, here are some things that, I noted that you said that I can improve upon, or here are some opportunities you would like to see me strive for, or your feedback on some opportunities that I expressed that I'm interested in. How do they then go back and have a meaningful follow-up conversation about what they've received? And Tamara and Tracy and Ariel as well, but just kind of some feedback there would be great.
I'll let Tracy answer that, because that's a hard question. No pressure.
No pressure. So there's a few things to do there, and they're not easy. One is you've got to be brave. You've got to be courageous, and you've got to be willing to have the conversation. I had a situation when I was an associate and I was pregnant with my second child, and I screwed up a motion for summary judgment. I just did. I wasn't feeling well. I was having complications. I'm not trying to make excuses. I screwed up. I did it. I acknowledged it to a certain extent in my self-evaluation. Now, my older, wiser self would probably say I could have dealt with it a little bit better at the time, but I didn't hide from it in my self-evaluation. Let's put it that way. And I received 2 reviews from the senior partner and the junior partner on the case. And the junior partner, I would say, gave me a very balanced review and noted the mistake I made, but also noted the contributions I made to the case overall and offered some suggestions for improvement, et cetera. Now, I had not had any conversations with either the senior partner or the junior partner about the fact that, I was not feeling well at the time and had all of these other things going on. Had never had conversations with them. And I remember my LDC advisor saying to me, you really need to have a conversation with them. You really need to do that. I was scared of the senior partner. I was like, oh, I don't think I want to do this. I don't think they're going to. So I started with the junior partner. I reached out to the junior partner and I didn't want to. I was embarrassed. I felt uncomfortable. I felt like I could make things worse by the conversation, but I did. I asked her if she'd have lunch with me, and she did. And she was so gracious. She very much wanted to hear what I had to say. She wished I had said something a little bit sooner. She appreciated that I acknowledged the balanced nature of her review, that yes, I owned my mistake, but also appreciated that she could see past that mistake and highlight some of the other positive things we did. And I ended up going on to work with that junior partner on multiple cases after that as a result of that interaction. I was scared beyond belief to have that conversation. I did not want to have it. I was so convinced. I had convinced myself, because we're our worst critics, right? We get our own selves worked up more than anybody else. I was so convinced that she was going to react negatively or say, don't make excuses, or, you just got to work harder. But that wasn't what happened. And I'm so grateful that my LDC advisor at that time really pushed me to say, you need to have a conversation. You at least need to go back and have this conversation. Even if it does go as bad as you say it will, it doesn't mean it's the end of the world. It doesn't mean you won't be successful here at Seyfarth. It doesn't mean you won't, ultimately go on to achieve all the things you want to do. But you have to make sure that you are, having this dialogue so that you can move past it. And you are not forever in your own mind being haunted by what happened here and always looking over your shoulder as to whether something's going to happen again or what else is going to go on. But also, to show that you can build those relationships and you can build upon things and move forward and do it. I am so grateful that my advisor really suggested and pushed that I do so. And I'm so grateful to this day that I did it. Yes, there were awkward moments in the conversation. Yes, there was some uncomfortability, but at the end of the day, I, ultimately reached a point where it was both good for me as well as ultimately for the person that I was talking with about this. So be brave, be courageous, take a chance on people. I fully agree and acknowledge there are some that are going to disappoint you. I've had it happen too, but for all the ones that don't disappoint you, it really is a great thing.
Thank you. Tamarin, if you have anything to add there?
I mean, that was so well said. I can't follow that. So I'll pass the buck to Aria.
Okay, well, you know what? I never turn down a buck that's passed to me. That was actually, I mean, I wish I had a story that had that kind of a happy ending. Look, I think these conversations are very hard, but they're important. And I think, from a developmental perspective, to avoid the conversation, particularly around feedback that is perhaps not in agreement with you or feedback that's tough, I think if you avoid it and you don't address it, I think you actually make it much worse. So yet you do have to be brave. You will encounter folks who aren't going to be as gracious as what Tracy described. And I think that that's an important, that's an important process to go through as well. We all, whether we're transactional lawyers or litigators or advising difficult clients, we are dealing with difficult people all the time. And so that skill set, that ability to absorb and to be resilient and to find what you take out of that experience and build upon that, that's a very important skill. So I would probably add a last point, and I'm going to borrow Tamron's word, is don't have those conversations on your mad day. So you get your review, you are really mad about what somebody said. Take a breath, take 24 hours, take 48 hours, take what you need to be able to go into that conversation. And I would tell you, I've had these conversations before. I've had people come at me and tell me I'm wrong. And I'm the first to admit that I'm wrong. But what I want to see is I want to see some ownership. And more importantly than that, I want to see what's your plan? Because the idea behind this is not to knock you down. The idea is to try to help you improve and develop. And so if you feel knocked down, for example, by something I have said, then I'm not doing my job well, because my job is not to knock you down. My job is to help you develop and help you become the best lawyer you can be.
That's very helpful. I think one item that we could go over a little bit more, and that might feed into kind of the discussion of, how do you follow up and get meaningful feedback? We've had some discussion here at SciFarth about being a bias interrupter. If any of you could share your feedback on that and how you can do that, both from the perspective of the individual receiving the review and both from the perspective of being the person giving a review.
Yeah, I'll take that since I've passed on a number of questions now. But I think as a reviewer, I have to catch myself of being too kind or giving too nice of a review to people that I really like. And I may like them personally, I may see a lot of potential in them, but maybe their performance didn't match how I think of them in a personal sense and the potential that I think that they have down the road. And so as a reviewer, I have to stop myself when I know I'm close to an associate or someone that I'm reviewing and really, again, go back to the facts and look at their evaluation and where they thought they were relative to the work that we did together, especially if you're giving a substantive review on people that you've worked with. So really separating potential and likability with actual performance, because there are people that are brilliant, that when I work with them, they make my legal life easier because I can give them something, they run with it, and it is, 99% there. And I say 99% there because if I said 100, what am I here for? But that said, they may not be the same person that I would, want to hang out with on the weekends or, take a client to a baseball game because I know they're going to be good in that situation. I have to recognize that different associates have different strengths. And while I may lean to be, lean into liking someone because they're outgoing or whatever, they have a personality that really, you're drawn to, you have to separate those things out when it comes to performance. And I guess and also as a manager now and doing associate reviews, I have to make sure that my team, they are clear as to what my expectations are. And as Ariel mentioned, knowing that sometimes someone may not have performed not because of them, but because you were a bad manager. You didn't give clear instructions. You didn't let them know in advance that you had certain expectations, such as this is on a short timeline. So if I say we have to move and jump, I actually mean it this time. This is not a fire drill. We really do have to move and jump for this client as soon as they pick up the phone. So making sure that I was clear in my expectations, and just because one associate may understand Tamron talk, realizing that I may not talk the same language, speak the same language as someone else, and changing the way I communicate with people to make sure I'm really optimizing the flow of communication. And so recognizing those things in myself as an evaluator and making sure that my team knows my expectations, that I recognize when I'm not being clear and or am not speaking the same language as someone, that I try to resolve those issues before we head into evaluation season. And if I've done that, I can feel a little bit better if I have to give evaluations that may not be as positive or glowing because they missed the mark somehow. I can say, we had a discussion in January where I set forth my expectations, and there are a few instances where you missed the mark. I can kind of point back to prior conversations.
Excellent.
And, I echo everything Tamron said. I mean, that's interrupting bias left and right. And, for me, in addition to that, and it's something I alluded to earlier, it's, stepping up also when you see bias taking place, whether it's in an evaluation or something else. And I get it. It's not always the easiest thing to do. And, people might say, well, person's well-intentioned. They don't mean to be fill in the blank. But, at the end of the day, it's the impact that matters, not the intention. And the impact on the individual can't be fixed by intentions. And so it's important to me to interrupt that bias, to step in. It doesn't mean you make assumptions about ill motives or anything like that, but you just step in and you point it out and you confront it and you address it, and you don't leave it hanging out there or people wondering. And if needed, get advice. For those of you on this program who don't realize it, Corey Crew's office is literally next door to mine. Since she's arrived here at Seifert, there have been many times I've gone knocking on her door and said, okay, here's the challenge. I think I know what to do. Tell me how I'm not looking at this the right way. Tell me what I'm missing. Tell me, question me. I don't know, do something. And, of course she laughs at me because it's not that simple, right? But nonetheless, she's a great resource for me, and I trust her, and I trust her judgment. I trust her insights. And so, no, you all can't have Corey, sorry. But at the end of the day, you all can find those different people. And even before Corey, I know it's hard to believe we had a time before Corey, but even before Corey, I had different people that I trusted here that I could turn to help me figure out, how do I have this conversation? How do I stand up here? How do I make sure that I'm not letting this happen? Is this something beyond me, right? Is this something I need backup for, right? Having that is really, really important. And don't feel like you always have to figure it out on your own. We don't always have all of the answers. We don't always know the best way to tackle something. Leverage those resources to figure it out. I'm one who likes to just charge ahead, but sometimes I have to remind myself, I don't always know the best way to do this. So maybe take a step back a minute, think about this. Even when I'm not having a mad day, I charge ahead. No, just kidding. But nonetheless, certainly make sure that you realize that you don't also have to always be that sort of person on your own doing it. Leverage other resources, leverage other people who feel the same way, leverage people who want to support you and to support the overall culture.
And Alexia, the only thing I'll add, those are all terrific sort of bias interrupter tools. And the only thing I would add, and because I've seen this and had to work through this, we all have a tendency as reviewers. We have folks that we've worked with that we really like, who know our style. And so those become our comparators, and everybody gets compared to them. And so we talked a little bit about this in the beginning of the program when folks do their self-evaluations, that they should be thinking about themselves and not comparing to themselves to others. Well, the same goes for the folks who are doing the reviewers. We, as the folks in the room, we need to make sure that evaluators are evaluating the person based on the evidence of their body of work, as opposed to comparing them to their favorite associate or the favorite person they work with on the last case or anything like that. I think that's an important way of interrupting bias or interrupting sort of preferences.
I agree wholeheartedly. And I think it kind of harkens back to a little bit about what we talked about at the beginning, Ubuntu, focusing on the collective and being a good member of that collective, being a good citizen of that collective. I think that that's a very important part of working together towards a particular goal. We have a few more minutes left, so I want to, before we get into our final questions, read out the CLE code. I know how critical that is, especially as for many of us hurtling towards the deadline for CLE credit. So the CLE code for our program today is SS, as in Sci-Fi Shaw, 9765. Again, it's SS 9765. So as we're getting towards the end of our discussion, I think, what we've talked about is getting useful feedback and sharing our personal experiences with getting feedback. If you guys could provide me with some general tips. I mean, you guys have provided a wealth of knowledge and wisdom here, but if you have any other general tips for individuals preparing their self-evaluations, as well as any information or anecdotes on how preparing self-evaluations has helped shape your careers, any useful advice you've gotten, and how you've implemented that into your career, and it's gotten you as far as it's gotten you. So I would love to hear from all of you on that one.
I wish I would have taken Tracy's advice about not copying and pasting reviews year after year. I realized that a little bit late, because sometimes you get advice that only certain people are reviewing your reviews and you shouldn't spend a lot of time on it, or you get really busy, and because reviews tend to line up right with the end of our associate year, at least at our firm. And so people may be incredibly busy trying to get their hours for the year, so you wait till the last minute to do your review. Like Tracy, I encourage you not to do that, because especially if you have an eye towards partnership, at some point you're going to have to write a partnership memo, and they're going to ask you to take a look back and think about the things that you've learned and how you built your skill set and the clients that you worked with, and how you proliferated business or grew business or whatever. You don't want to get to the end of the road where you work so hard and you're finally knocking on partnership's door and you have to write this partnership memo, and you look back at your other memos and you said, I did the same thing every year. And that can't be right, because I've done so many other things, and I'm certain that I did like a big case or I closed a big deal. What year was that? And you will kick yourself for having worked so hard and being so diligent and making sure you're your favorite lawyer's favorite lawyer to get to that point and having to recreate the wheel. Don't do that. Don't. So I really encourage you to take your reviews seriously. I'm not encouraging you to spend, half a year on them. But as important things come up, take note of it, file it away in an email or some folder where you can find it at the end of the year, and you have all of the things that you want to talk about or brag about in one place. And you can house that, and you can keep your reviews as something you can use in the future.
I love it. So I will just share something that a very wise and dear friend of mine said to me years ago: be your own best friend and act like it. You would probably tell your best friend how to handle certain things very differently than you're going to tell yourself. So remind yourself to be your own best friend when you are thinking about how to address certain issues and how to do that, and then act upon that.
That's great. Both of you, great advice. I will maybe end it with we read a lot of self-evaluations. What I would encourage folks to do is you want to be fulsome in how you talk about yourself, but you don't want to go on forever. So there's benefit to being succinct and organized. I won't say brief, but understand that you don't it's hard for us to read something that waxes on poetically, for page after page. And then I go back to one of the most useful things for me. It's hard. Tracy and I talked about this. The best feedback I ever got was as a result of a difficult evaluation from a partner in the Boston office who's now since retired. And the result of that was really what transformed sort of my, focus on my particular part of my practice, and the ability to sort of take a breath, sit down, have that difficult discussion, and refocus that discussion not on the bad, but on what I needed to do to improve, and then to tackle that. That made all the difference in the world. So I'm grateful, even though it was difficult. I'm grateful for that kind of feedback.
Thank you. And thank you to each of you all. It has been such a pleasure opportunity to work with you all on this panel. I truly appreciate all of your insights, and I'm sure all the other associates do as well.
Thank you, Alexia.
Thank you, Alexia. We appreciate you moderating.
So I
Take
think
care, everyone.
our program. So
Bye,
Have a
Tamara.
great day, everyone.
Bye, Tracy. Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
bye.